if we could turn the stream on. Thank you. So welcome to the Communities and Place Overview and Scrutiny meeting. We've got some interesting reports coming and chance to scrutinise, but we'll start with apologies for absence.
Morning. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Castle, Councillor Richardson, Councillor Watson and Julie Stewart. Thank you. Thank
you, Nicola. And the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 30th of June, is everybody happy with those? Everybody that was here, are they happy that they're a true and fair record? Yes, so we've got proposer and Mark, and could somebody second that? Thank you, Colin. Disclosures of members' interest. Does anybody have any interest to disclose? No, that's great. And then item 4 is the forward plan of Cabinet decisions on page 7 and 8. And that's really just for information. I think it's Sean. Do you want to just give us a quick?
Just very briefly, Chair. Yes, this is the forward plan of forthcoming cabinet decisions to be made. There is one item that falls within the remit of this committee, and it's actually the draft private housing sector strategy report, which is actually on today's agenda, Chair. So it's as I say, it's just for information.
Yeah, so that basically gives us a heads up of what's coming through the cabinet system, and if there's anything we're particularly sort of concerned about that isn't already coming to scrutiny that we want to raise, we can bring that forward. Nick, yeah.
There's probably a very good reason, but I was just wondering why the Energising Blythe programme isn't coming to scrutiny.
That's a fair question. Sean, do you have any idea?
Yeah, as I say, not all reports, cabinet reports, do come to scrutiny. It is a matter for the committee to decide what they want to bring forward. What we try to avoid, as much as possible, is bringing very local issues through the scrutiny process. Very often, local issues go through the local area councils. But that is not to say that if there is a particular issue that you do want to bring forward, that you can let us know. I would need to double check on that particular report. There may well have been a good reason for that. And I would also need to double check that it would matter for this committee rather than corporate services. So I would need to look into that. But by raising it, are you actually saying that you think that in principle that it should be a scrutiny report?
Not necessarily. I don't really know enough about it to comment on that. I was just wondering. I just noticed it wasn't coming to scrutiny and wondered if there was a reason.
There's often a reason. Chairman's Group, which is the chairs and vice chairs of all the scrutiny committees, meet probably once every couple of months. They go through the forward plan. They do identify issues that they would like to put on the scrutiny programme. That wasn't identified, and that's probably why it isn't listed. But I would need to go back and check. But I think there probably was a good reason. But that's not to say that if members of the committee then highlight a particular report and say, actually, we would like to consider it, that couldn't happen. So I will go back and check.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think I saw Stephen. Oh, go on, you've got your light on, so.
Just to comment on the Energising Blythe, to let you know that all the Blythe Town councillors and the Blythe councillors like myself, we meet regularly on a monthly basis in Blythe Town Council and discuss the Energising Blythe project, and I think it's quite well scrutinised within that committee before it even comes any further in council. I'm sure if there was any real reason to bring it to scrutiny, it would get brought to scrutiny, but other than that, I think within the team at Blythe, it's scrutinised quite well anyway.
Okay, thank you for that, Eileen. Stephen.
It was just to say, Chair, that if we're going to go into any debate or discussion around this, I'll need to declare an interest because it is a project that's handled by the Advanced Northumberland board as well, of which I'm a member, so I've got an interest to declare there.
No, that's noted. I think that So I think Sean's going to basically ask the question, and if you could just circulate a note, but Eileen's comments are well known.
I'm probably going to come back with Eileen's comments.
Yeah, which is fine. And I think if Nick, if you want to, if you feel it needs to come forward, just get in touch and we can have a discussion around that.
I mean, this is obviously a particular project, but obviously if you want to look at the issue as a county-wide issue about sustainable fuels and energy and that sort of thing, that would be a separate report that you could quite legitimately raise with the chair and through chairman's group to bring us the scrutiny item.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's the forward plan. And now we have the private sector housing strategy for 2021 to 2023. And Phil is going to give us a very Colin's going to introduce it, and then Phil's going to give us a very quick canter through. And
Thanks,
then we'll
Chair.
open it up to questions.
I'll introduce this report from Cabinet. It's the private sector housing strategy for the next 3 years. This report provides details of the proposed strategy objectives for the Council's private sector housing services, and I'll just quickly run through the main bullet points that the main issues in this report, and then I'll hand over to Phil. Strategic context: the Northumberland Corporate Plan 2018-21 states, having a decent roof over your head is fundamental to this health and well-being. None of you should be forced to live on the streets or in a home that is a health hazard or physically impedes independence. The principles set out in the draft Northumberland local plan states having a decent home is fundamental to the health and well-being of everyone living in Northumberland. The actual strategy sets out how we plan to work with partners, stakeholders and local communities to deliver services and support good quality housing and management standards within private sector homes in Northumberland. And the strategy builds on the aims and objectives of the previous private sector housing strategy, that was 2015 to 2020. Housing is a key determinant of health. Poor housing conditions continue to cause preventable deaths and contribute to health inequalities. Most residents in Northumberland, that's 83%, live in properties that are privately owned or privately rented. Now, the aims and objectives of this strategy, the four objectives: increase access to affordable homes in the private sector through bringing empty homes back into use, ensuring a healthy private rented sector through improving the condition, safety and energy efficiency of private sector housing, provide advice and support and take action where necessary for homeowners, landlords and tenants in the private sector. And the fourth one and last one is provide services to assist access to sustainable tenancies in the private rented sector. Now, what I will say is that this report was drawn up pre-election, so I wasn't actually involved in this report. I'm just picking up on it, which is why Phil's should be able to field all the questions on it. So I'll hand over to you, Phil. Oh, sorry, back to chair. Sorry.
Thank you. I suspect you probably said all that Phil was about to say, but thank you. But anyway, Phil, is there anything you want to add, and then we can open it up to questions? I mean, I think for all of these meetings, we will assume that the papers have been read to move things along quickly. And
yeah, I'm happy, Chair, I think, just to take questions. I think, as you say, the report itself sets out the information. The strategy is a fairly short strategy, but I think I'd like to say fairly logical. Not that I actually wrote it, but I think it does follow through in sort of logical order, sets out the context for it, sets out the actual aims and objectives. And probably I think what members may wish to do is just ask a number of questions on the actual aims and objectives that we've set out, which hopefully I'll be able to respond to.
does anybody have any questions? I've got a few, but we'll start with Brian, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of searching questions more than anything else. It's very surprising that we've got 80% of rented properties in Northumberland, and I think you touched on it, Colin, around standards. We need to have a better setup in respect of the housing standards. And the reality is, and I'm trying not to speak about certain areas, but there is a Hurst in Ashington that has a high proportion of empty properties. And the one thing you didn't touch on was it's not just about the quality of the house interior and inside. It's the quality of the house from the exterior as well. And, you know, the people that live in those areas, it's how they conduct themselves, the antisocial behaviour that some very small minority of people cause around that area. And then all of a sudden you find that people don't want to live there. So there's that thing that needs to be controlled. Also maybe touch on about licensing and about registering landlords that do rent properties. I know at the minute it's just a voluntary thing, and I know through government it's now been discussed around, you know, having a licensing scheme. And the other thing that absent landlords, I believe that the properties, you know, when they're not around, deteriorate very much, and it reflects to the area. And I think that we should have a little bit more powers around that to say, look, clean your area up. No, I don't know, maybe Phil will be able to answer this question. What is our link with is it the Department of Work and Pensions or the DSS around payments that go into these properties? And where do we have any leverage that if an absent landlord who will not look after his property but still receives money from the government or the local associations, or, you know, why have we not got the power to say, well, actually, we're not going to pay your rent unless you get your properties tidied up? And I know for Northumberland, it's a very strange conversation because you've got the urban and the rural, and every area around Northumberland has different issues and different problems, and they've got to be you've got to be tackled in different ways. So the reality is, it's just to start the conversation, and if we can get the private landlords on board, it does also help with regeneration for Blythe and whatever area in Northumberland, and it joins up committees, it joins up, dare I say, chambers of commerce of various towns around Northumberland. And I just can't understand why we're not talking more about it in a joined up fashion rather than just an individual landlord rent a property out. So thank you very much, Chair.
Great. Okay. Well, I mean, we had a bit of a pre-meeting next door before this meeting, and I did raise with Phil the issue of the Hurst, so I'm sure he'll be able to give us a bit of an update on the Hurst in a second. But you've raised some important issues there, and some quite complex issues. Colin is indicating he'd like to speak,
Yeah.
so we'll ask Colin, and then we'll go over to Phil.
You asked, well, you said an awful lot there, Brian, but Phil will have to answer the technical question you asked, but what I will say is this is a private sector housing strategy, but I'm having lots and lots of discussions with Phil and his officers, not just about the private sector housing, but the whole picture of housing in Northumberland, and how you mentioned joined up with other sectors and other departments. We're looking at that all the time now, so there's a lot going on behind the scenes to actually look into everything that you've actually just mentioned. Because, you know, this is just looking at the private sector, but we are talking about, with housing, it's not just private sector, it's the public sector, it's housing generated through planning, it's affordable housing, it's so-called council housing. We'll look at the whole picture, I can assure you of that. But the technical question you asked about how it links in with the Work and Pensions Department, Phil will have to answer that.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Could you start just by giving us a bit of an update on the Hurst then? And I mean, it's a long-standing. I mean, when I say
Mr. Chairman,
long-standing,
I'll need to declare a personal and prejudicial interest and leave. It's advanced
Okay, is it yeah? I mean, if that's fine.
Chair,
yeah, we'll call you back.
Chair, actually, before you leave, Stephen, could we just have a general conversation, because once again the Hurst is being raised as a problem for Northumberland.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah. Well, I'll have the general conversation first. If you could answer the technical questions first for Phil, and then if you could and then we'll ask Stephen to leave, and then sorry. And then we'll go on to the issue in specific to Ashley.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's probably a number of questions in there, Councillor Gallagher, so I'll hopefully try and deal with most of them. just to clarify one point, what the strategy refers to is there's 83% of accommodation within Northumberland is either privately rented or privately owned. That's not private rented. However, I think it is important to highlight that actually private sector housing or rented accommodation is now a greater proportion of the market than social housing nationally. And that probably tipped the balance about 3 years ago. So we're now seeing more people living in private sector accommodation than we are in social housing. So I think that's why it's very important for ourselves as a local authority to engage with the private sector. And, you know, for all the reasons that you've said, the private sector has a major influence on our communities, on regeneration, as Councillor Horncastle said, in terms of the wider determinants of health, etc., etc. So it is absolutely key that we do engage with the private sector. Now, we do that in a number of ways, just trying to pick up on some of the questions that you asked. We do a lot, and we set it out in the strategy by engagement. So we hold an active landlords forum. We have a forum every year, and we've got a link in with a number of private sector landlords. And that's about trying to encourage landlords to improve their management standards or improve the quality of housing in Northumberland. Arguably, we are, though, dealing with the willing already. The very fact they're prepared to come to the table is a demonstration of their willingness to actually provide better accommodation for their tenants. So where we're also looking at the strategy is about how do we engage with those landlords who will not actively come to the table or will not actively promote good accommodation. So some of that, again, set out in the strategy is very much around making sure tenants and landlords are aware of their legal responsibilities and their legal entitlements. So there is a common belief, you know, that if you go and complain to the council, you will get evicted. There is legislation which protects you from that. So again, it's about ensuring people are fully informed about what their rights are, what their entitlements are, and equally from a landlord's perspective, what their rights and entitlements are, because there will be times that they need to evict a tenant, but they need to do it in the right way, etc., etc. But from that joined up perspective, one of the things we're trying to look at is how do we support people in the private sector to sustain a tenancy? If we can keep more people in a tenancy, then that has a direct impact on my service by reducing the amount of homelessness you see, or roof sleeping or otherwise. So it is a very complex picture that we're working with. And it is, as Councillor Horncastle said, we are looking at it not just from the point of view of the council owns 8,500 units of accommodation. This is all we're interested in. It is the much bigger picture. So I think when you get into, and I'll just talk generally about estates, so I'm not going to talk about the Hurst in any particular detail. When you talk about estates, absolutely right, estates throw up a whole range of different challenges for us. Some estates we see larger scale void loss. Some we see areas of, you know, higher deprivation, etc., etc. And some we see, as you rightly say, in terms of antisocial behaviour. I think on most estates, though, there is still a community, and it's about trying to work with that community, and if you like, trying to get the community not necessarily take responsibility or lead, but give, again, support to that community in terms of actually trying to turn estates around and actually make them good places to live. Because in reality, you know, when you look at our housing stock, and again, it's set out in the report, one of our aspirations is to probably do a survey of our local housing stock, our private housing stock, see what condition it's in, and again, how do we invest in it. So the more we can work with our communities, I think the more we can actually benefit the community. So whether that be actually in terms of giving them advice about the legal position, whether about dealing with ESB in partnership with the police and partners, whether it be about littering, fly tipping, etc., etc. All of those things we are actively working with now through my service, through local services with Rick O'Farrell, Paul Jones, Greg Gavin, etc., etc. You're right, all of those bits have to come together somewhere to give one package. What we can't do is simply say, well, we'll deal with this problem here. We'll deal with the physical condition of the property, and that'll solve it. It won't. It will deal with the physical structure, and that's about it at this point in time. So it's a much bigger picture. I think in terms of just touching on, sort of, again, some of the things you referred to in terms of our involvement with housing, yes, we've got that engagement, but we also have an enforcement role. So I've got staff who are trained in what's called the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, and they will carry out enforcement in the private sector. However, that is something that we, you know, are invited to do by the tenant. We don't have any powers which allow us to go and knock on a door and say we're going to come and inspect this house to see if it's compliant. It has to be tenant-led. They've got to raise the concern with us. We've then got to deal with the issue. and then, you know, we will use whatever powers we think are necessary. So again, it brings it back to that point. It's about empowering residents, empowering tenants, so they are not fearful of coming forward and actually raising those issues with us. But we can do all of that. You mentioned licensing. Licensing is something we are looking at in terms of selective licensing. It's not the panacea that everybody makes it out to be, but it does have a part to play. And I think this is the thing with housing. Selective licensing has a place to play. Dealing with antisocial behaviour has a place, but it's about bringing them all together at the right time. So we are looking at selective licensing, and for those who aren't familiar, this is an ability of the local authority to introduce a licensing system or scheme within a defined geographical area. And what that basically means is we will set certain standards around the standard of properties and the condition of properties and the tenancy agreement. Where it becomes challenging is, you've got to create the evidence base to actually prove there is a need for selective licensing. So that's very much about demonstrating failure in management standards, abandonment, antisocial behaviour, etc., etc. So you have that evidence base. To take it forward, you then got to go through actually just a council process. It's the council that can make the designation in terms of selective licensing. So that sounds all reasonably straightforward and simple. Where the challenge potentially comes is, you are charging landlords a licensing fee to actually have a property in that area. So you've got to have your evidence base right, because you're at risk of challenge from them by bringing the scheme forward. But you also run the risk that some landlords, especially those who aren't necessarily managing the best properties or in the best condition, they will simply say, that's fine, I'll just leave my property empty. So I'll not participate in the licensing scheme because I will not let that property out. So you then potentially get a problem of voids. So there is a balance to be struck in terms of where you use selective licensing and where you do not. But ideally, you know, we will look at a pilot within Northumberland. We will look to try and bring a scheme forward and then see how that works in one area with a view to considering in other parts of Northumberland. I think the final comment I would make, because I'm probably covered most, but there may be things you want to come back to me on, Councillor Gallagher. It was that question about, you know, we pay, you know, in terms of what we pay to landlords. That is not something my service has any involvement with, nor do I believe in terms of Graham Barnes, in terms of Revs and Bens, do we have any ability to actually carry out a property check or an inspection to make sure it is at, let's say, a decent home standard, or have powers to actually refuse to make that payment through to the landlord or through to the tenant. So again, we come back in a bit of a loop. It's very much about saying to the landlord, we need to work with you, but saying to the tenant, if you are living in accommodation which you believe to be substandard, having an impact upon you, you need to highlight that with the local authority, and we will then look at our enforcement powers, you know, which do extend anything from quite simple powers to carry out repairs and maintenance, require the landlord to carry out repairs and maintenance, right through to prohibition and closure of a property. So we have significant powers, but we are not able to go and knock on the front door and invite ourselves in. We have to be invited in by the tenant in the first place. And that's why it's a big job about just raising the awareness side of it. Not sure if I've covered everything. Hopefully I've covered a number of things, but I'm happy to come back.
Can I just seek clarification? If you are going to discuss the Hurst, we're not actually agreeing anything in terms of it. So would it just be a personal?
I think it would.
Yeah.
I'm no legal expert, and I have gone unstuck on this myself in the past. But I think it would be a personal interest rather than a prejudicial interest. And I think it's only, I think I'm second guessing what Phil's about to say, but my guess is he's just going to give us a broad update, acknowledging the fact that the Hurst is a particular problem, and that he has, that it's something that isn't being ignored, and it's kind of, it's a long-term project and it's work in progress. Is that?
I won't take part in any part of that discussion.
I think you'd be happy to sit and listen, though. It's, and just for everybody's benefit, I think the reason that we're having this discussion is in a paper that relates to private sector housing is that, of course, the Hurst is owned by Advanced Northumberland, which is a private company, albeit 100% owned by a public local authority.
So in terms of the Hurst, I mean, we don't even have to re-talk about the Hurst per se. You can just talk about estate and estate regeneration. But I mean, in terms of the Hurst itself, yes, there is, like most estates, it is mixed tenure. So we've got Advance own some stock in there. You've got a number of owner-occupiers in there. You've got a number of absentee landlords. You've probably got landlords by default who actually didn't set out to become a landlord, but they've inherited property or other things. So what you do have in Hurst is, yes, is a mix of tenure. You've got all the problems, I think, that Councillor Gallagher's described in terms of potentially abandonment, antisocial behaviour, etc., etc. So we are actively looking at, what are the options in terms of estate regeneration generally across the county council. So not specifically within the Hurst, but what are the options for the county council? I think one of the challenges we face is that at this point in time, and I was actually speaking to Homes England yesterday, I think it was, if memory serves right. One of the big challenges we have is that in terms of Homes England, who administer significant grant on behalf of MHCLG, Ministry of Housing and Local Government, they're really tasked with creating net increase in housing stock. That's what they want to see. They want to see new houses, they want to see net housing stock, and that was, set up by MHCLG. Really what you're talking about in terms of larger estates and estate regeneration is probably doing some remodelling work within those estates. And, they can apply that to any estate in any part of Northumberland or the North East region. You are looking at doing some remodelling work, which may be about retaining some of the stock. It may be about doing demolition in part, but it's about finding the right solution for that particular area. So ordinarily what you would try to do is some sort of options appraisal where you would look at all of the issues and then try and develop a number of sort of strategies which you think could actually sort of address the main issues within that locality. And that's the process you would ordinarily go through. So yes, we are well aware of, concerns raised in respect of the Hurst. Yes, we are well aware of the need to look at estate regeneration across Northumberland because historically the district councils prior to the county council had no real history of large-scale demolition and clearance. So we have probably a disproportionate amount of pre-1919 housing stock, which is simply getting older. So whether you apply it to one location in Ashington or you apply it to another area, another part of Northumberland, it's the same issues. We've got housing stock which is getting older and we've got a number of challenges there. So our approach to it would be to look at some form of an options appraisal to inform what you would wish to do within that area. And obviously with any sort of options appraisal, at a point, you would then wish to bring the community into that discussion. Because I genuinely believe that whilst we raise concerns about void properties, antisocial behaviour, littering, etc., etc., we still have communities within all of these locations. They may be smaller than they once were, because obviously, in the case of the Hurt, the pit is gone now. So the actual focus for that community has changed. But there is still a community living there who have lived there for many years as owner-occupiers. So it's not about does the county council go in and just decide what it wants to do. It's about doing the options appraisal and then engaging with the community and finding the right solution for it. So that's a general approach to what we would do around estate regeneration, which you can apply to anywhere across Northumberland.
That's great, thank you very much. Brian, do you want to?
Can I just come?
Yeah.
I didn't know if Colin wanted to come in on some of the points beforehand. No? Just a couple of points. Just coming back to the first part of your presentation. One thing that hasn't been talked about was COVID-19. And COVID-19 has been a shock for the world. And for my community, my town and this county, it's given people a fresh thought. But more than anything else, it's shown the strength of what communities. Every county councillor in here will know, a lot of the time you think you're in Sleepy Hollow, but really the community came, the community helped the areas and the towns. And with that, obviously, people were kind of held within their own houses for a long time. So the quality of the houses needs to be looked at, and it needs to be looked at as a group. You mentioned something about, a scheme that would license the private landlords. The problem is, when will it come? Because for me, it seems as though it's been something that's been discussed for a while. And with that licensing scheme, it has to have teeth. And the reality is, there is a pathway through this. There's health and safety that says that if these properties aren't up to scratch, let's not just talk to them in that respect. Let's use the health and safety and the condition of the properties as dare I say, a stick to pull these properties in good repair. And the other thing is you touched on about the tenants. I understand you can't go just knocking on anybody's door. But the reality is if the tenants are reassured that they're being protected by some sort of legislation, that they may invite you in, because at this moment in time, people are very wary about making the landlord upset and they may get evicted. So that's maybe something to think about as well. And same again, coming back to the joining up with Northumberland County Council and the Department of Work and Pensions, I think that that's a conversation to have. It should always be a conversation to have, because, you know, why pay somebody for a poor service of our local residents? So even if we can't decide or agree a strategy to deal with that, at least the conversations are there, and maybe a letter to them poor landlords may shake them up a bit from the, you know, without any power, but just to say it's come to our attention. The other thing is, you know, if these properties are getting in such a bad state of repair, why aren't Northumberland County Council looking at them and possibly wanting to buy them? Now, I know that there's a scheme there that says if we bought those properties or put them up to scratch again, when there's legislation there that says when that property is sold again, we can claw that money back. We need to get the areas, the conditions of the areas, and there's one property that has just been neglected totally. Now, what they try and do is to put pressures on these private landlords to increase their the rateable value or the rates, and it goes from, I believe, 100 to 200 to 500%. Yeah. I know of a property in Ashington that is 500%, and he's quite happy to pay that direct debit and still have that property in disrepair. And this is the kind of thing that we need to address. We need to show that Northumberland County Council care, have got some teeth, and are approachable and can protect tenants as well. Now that's the first part. The second part is about the Hurst. Now, you know, I respect what Stephen said before about, you know, leaving because of, but the reality is Councillor Gallagher didn't bring the Hurst up. You guys did. So you know that there's a problem there. So can we work a bit harder in there? And it's not about putting money into it, because for years and years and years we've had money ploughed into that particular area. And the reality is it hasn't worked. The remodelling, councils have done that in the past. We need to get it. We haven't even got a plan, I don't think, about remodelling. So why can't we just even sit down and talk about the remodelling and, you know, the options appraisals? Let us have a conversation about that. Coming back to communities, I've just finished a conversation with a lady called Carol Brown, who's friends of the Hurst, and she's been very active in and around that area. Let's get those people in. Let's get the local councillors in, and let's, even if we've got a plan and we haven't got the fund, at least we've got a plan and we're discussing it. We know that there's a problem there. And ironically, I'm going to come back to the point. Councillor Gallagher from Ashington didn't bring it up. You guys did. Yep, no, you know that there's a problem there. So try and get it sorted.
Well,
so
this is a scrutiny committee.
Very much. That's me rant.
This is, yeah, I mean, I think we should be focusing scrutiny on questions and getting answers. And I think there were one or two questions in there, which I think Phil has already covered. But I think what you've usefully done is you've highlighted that it's a very challenging situation. And I think the two main challenges are one of refurbishing substandard properties across the county, both in the private sector and public sector, and also making properties more energy efficient and contributing towards our climate change aspirations. I think Phil has explained that both those things are sort of ongoing processes, and I think specifically in relation to the Hurst, there is work going on, and the community will be engaged in that discussion. We'll come on to, I've got a couple of questions around empty homes and EDMOs later on, but I think, first of all, I've got to go to Malcolm first, because he raised his hand probably about 20 minutes ago. So we'll ask Malcolm for his question, then we'll go to Eileen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions. I think the first one may well have been answered, but the private sector housing strategy, does that include housing associations? Does that include the social housing?
I don't think it does, but Phil will.
Got that. Not specifically, because I think when you talk about social housing and registered providers, we have existing networks, we're working with them, and if you like, they are seen to be responsible landlords in the first instance. So a lot of that strategy is very much targeted at the private rented sector as opposed to the social housing sector, because we would still engage with them because it's still about housing, but it's not specifically picked up in that strategy.
Okay, then my follow-up would be a lot of the things that are referred to me direct off constituents and residents and tenants are about social housing provision and problems within it. So a number of years ago I asked for contact numbers for the housing associations and they were forthcoming, however they no longer work. So can we have a new set of contact details for all the housing providers, please? My second question is about your priority 3, and I'd like to know how we as elected members, because in a lot of cases, as I say, I'm the first point of contact for a lot of these tenants. How do we interact with that? And the fact that a tenant has got in touch with an elected member, does that constitute being invited in?
So in terms of priority 3, either from or on behalf of the tenant themselves, we are obliged to then notify the landlord of our intent to visit, etc., and give them the opportunity to visit with us. So it doesn't have to come direct from the tenant. If it's somebody who is speaking on their behalf, then that would constitute, whether you want to call it request for service, a complaint or inquiry, that would suffice, and we could then use our powers to visit, etc., etc. But that is the challenge for us. It's giving confidence to tenants that they can raise issues without that fear of potential eviction, etc. And just going back to something Councillor Gallagher was saying before, that has always been a long-standing problem, because in the private sector, most tenancies are on an assured basis of 6 months, whereas obviously within our stock, it's a secured tenancy for life, etc., etc. And again, government have looked at that. But all we can try to do is, if somebody makes contact with us, give them the assurance that we will deal with it, in a professional manner. We will endeavour to ensure that their landlord understands why the contact's been made, and we will endeavour to ensure that there isn't any sort of reprisals from that. But it can come via a number of routes to us, as long as it is on behalf of the tenant.
I think a lot of the problems certainly I've dealt with are resolved just with a conversation. We don't need to resort to statutory powers or anything, So that's the sort of angle I sort of take. But it's heartening to know that we have got the backup should we need it.
And I think, so if you look at the public protection part of my service, which is often described as a regulatory function, most of what we do within public protection is through discussion and engagement, whether that with businesses or people. Probably none more so evidenced over the last 18 months when we've dealt with COVID and the actual number of enforcement actions we've taken. It's been relatively low, but we've worked with business, we encourage businesses. And we adopt the same approach with landlords. That's the reason we've got the Landlords Forum. It's why we try and support the Rent Deposit Guarantee Scheme, which gives them confidence. It's why we look at accreditation of properties, because that is about working with landlords to try and encourage them to improve their property standards and provide a good offer to the tenant. The challenge is always going to be, as I said before, it's trying to bring those who are less willing to the table to have the conversation, which then opens us back up with the conversation we had before about those landlords who are absentee landlords. They're simply buying properties by auction, from the southeast of London in the northeast of England. They are either building up simply a pension pot That's what some people do. They simply will buy property. They won't invest in it because they think at a point in time they'll dispose of it and they'll get their return back on money, etc. So there is never going to be one simple fix to dealing with housing, private sector housing. It's a myriad of different things. My resource for dealing with private sector housing is probably about, in the public protection side, it's probably about 2.5, 3 people. So I don't have a massive resource that I can just roll out and solve all the problems in Northumberland, which is why we try and do it by discussion engagement, because that will have the better approach. And my experience from being a regulator over 40 years, it is now, yeah, 40 years, you can have a minimum legal standard and you can get people to a minimum legal standard by waving the stick. What you want to do is to engage with people and get them above the minimum legal standard by giving them something back or offering to work in partnership with them. And that's how you will drive up the standards, by doing more with them in partnership than simply trying to use enforcement. Because we haven't got enough resource, you know, to go around and enforce against every property in Northumberland. It's just not possible for me to do that.
The wrong button. Thank you very much. Eileen, you had a question.
Yeah, mine's just a quick one. It's about abandoned properties. I'm wondering in the future if we could have a look at this again. Certainly within my ward in Blythe, I've got a number of abandoned properties which the council have looked at, but they would cost more to do them up than the property's worth, right? But that has a detrimental effect on the neighbours adjoining them properties. A lot of them are in probate, but it's been going on all the time. I've been a councillor, and even longer than I've been a councillor, and nothing seems to happen. And I'm just wondering if something could be looked at in the future about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just add a question of my own which relates to that? Because I think the EDMOs are mentioned in the report, which obviously don't work in every instance where it's not financially viable. But I do wonder whether well, first of all, my question was like, how many EDMOs do you think we can do per year? Because obviously, if there are 1,729 properties across the county empty, you know, if we did 100 a year, that would be, you know, 17 years, and I don't realise that that's not possible. But and then I guess the other question is relating to that, not only bringing them empty properties back into use, but could there be the potential of another scheme structured in the same way as EDMOs, where basically funding is provided to private sector landlords to actually refurbish or put in renewable energy sources? And that is, you know, is because basically when you do an EDMO, you're taking an equity control of the property. So if the property is sold, it has to repay that money first, or the money comes from the rent in the first instance. But if that doesn't satisfy it, it comes from the equity. So could there be something similar to encourage landlords, because public, you know, sector money is cheaper than private sector money, and that might be a fairly risk-free way of doing something like that?
Again, I'll try and answer all of those questions with one answer. So, in terms of EDMOs, for those people unfamiliar, yes, empty dwelling management order, it's an enforcement tool which, as Councillor Over describes, allows you to take an interest in a property. So in essence, what we do is, or what the power allows you to do, is go through a legal process to claim, to actually have the EDMO granted through the property tribunal. The local authority then takes on the management of the property for generally a period of 7 years, and we then run the property, and at the end of the 7-year period, we hand it back to the landlord. One of the big challenges we have with EDMOs is, it's been alluded to, is the financial calculation. So if you have a property which has significant capital investment required at the outset, what you are looking at is, if your capital investment is whatever the figure is, £100,000, and you're going to have to invest that amount of money, but you're only going to claim back the rent of £35,000 over 7 years. It's not financially viable for us to do it, because we end up with a massive deficit on that particular property. So EDMOs work, but not always. So a couple of things we have done. We have run, which was a quasi-EDMO scheme, which was funded through Homes England, where we actually worked with landlords and took properties off them by agreement and consent to take it into our management and to manage it now. So we've got a number of properties across the county which we actually are running through that scheme. So we're doing that now. We've also got funding from Homes England, which allows the county council to buy stock and bring it into the housing revenue account. So in the last year, we've probably acquired in excess of 20 properties, which some have been empty, some have not been empty. But again, we've acquired properties to bring them into the housing revenue account because either it was within one of our existing estates, it was the other half of a semi, or it was a larger property which we required for part of the stock. So we've actually bought properties back and brought them into our stock. The other thing we're busy doing at the moment is we got an allocation allocated through Cabinet last year, which was, probably not the best timing in terms of the pandemic, etc. We've got an allocation, and what we're doing with that allocation is using it to do work in default on properties. So again, we have an enforcement power to do a range of things. If the landlord doesn't do the work, we have the ability then to do the work in default and then charge the landlord. That historically just creates potentially a risk of having lots of debts not repaid to the council. So what we've set up now is a small group led through my service, with planning, with legal services, with council tax, with property services. And what we're actively looking to do now, and we've got a couple we're looking at taking through the court process, is actively targeting properties, doing work in default to create a debt, and then using the debt to then claim title to the property. So we can actually go through the court system on the basis of the debt not being paid and recover the property and then dispose of the property. Again, the challenge we've got is you can deal with landlords for many, many years who simply don't pay, or they, not prepared to pay. If they walk up to you on the court, on the court steps and they clear the balance, that's it. We don't have any title to that property. But we are looking at actually doing that with a couple of properties now, just to see how that works. So where you've got the properties which don't meet the EDMO criteria purely and simply because of cost, or we've got people who are just in negative equity, because again, you've got a number of properties in Northumberland where people have bought them at the height of the housing market, they're in negative equity, they're not prepared to do anything, they're not prepared to repair them. We're looking at actually sort of using our enforcement powers across a range of different services, whether that be planning, whether it be ours, see if we can accrue a debt, and then seeking possession of the property, at which point we would dispose of it. So there are a number of things we can do. What is not there, though, unfortunately, is really a lot of support from Homes England, MHCLG, for grant funding in the private sector or regeneration. So it is going to be a challenge without some significant financial investment from, whether it be central government or otherwise, to do this, because landlords will make decisions based upon income and profit.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive. I think one of the other points worth making is obviously it's been Brian raised it earlier. We now, in 2020, we've agreed a policy to increase the rates on empty properties, and obviously we're in the second year of that now. I think by the time we get to the fourth year, or certainly to the 10th year, when some of those properties will be paying 400% rates, I think that will act as a strong incentive for those private landlords to do something with those properties.
I do think when you do that, though, you should really be looking at individual cases. I'm certainly aware of a case through no fault of their own. Person leases a building, the building has a flat attached to it, but in the terms of the lease, the council don't want the tenant to lease the flat out, but then they're still being penalised by paying the rent, the council tax, for that flat. And it's a very, very tricky situation, and it's very difficult because the person who has the lease on the building is a charity anyway, and they're being penalised for something that isn't their fault. So I think individual cases should be looked at properly and fairly, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something to raise directly with Graham's team probably, and but it is, I can understand that. Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to touch on, you mentioned it a little bit earlier on, and it's along the principle of what Phil was saying earlier. It's better to offer a carrot than the stick, and you mentioned how we can assist those landlords with energy efficiencies and things. Well, maybe one of the conversations that needs to be had is between, and I'm going to try and tie it in with the energy efficiency side of things, but also with something that maybe could be looked at along the carrot and stick carrot rather than stick line. Matt Baker, who is one of the council's directors, who's working with the climate change and energy side of things for the council. He's at one of the things, and I'm not going to do it justice because I can't explain it as well as he can, but one of the things he's identified is where there is market failure in terms of private homeowners being able to deliver energy efficiencies and be able to get those, whether they're solar panels, ground source heat pumps, technologies or whatever, into their properties. So one of the things he's looking at potentially is that will obviously need cabinet support when it gets further down the line, is utilising the Northumberland Community Bank to provide a loan facility to those homeowners and using the actual value of the equipment against the loan, because the equipment is of very high value. And that's one of the ways he's potentially identified to help the private homeowners do those energy efficiencies. But at the same time, and to try and tie it in with what Phil's saying, carrot and stick, carrot rather than stick, is it not something that, because I know you don't have the revenue or the staff to go around enforcing everything, but is it not something that we could use as a council, looking at providing capital to the Northumberland Community Bank where private landlords could get a loan facility, because it mentions owners of properties may wish to bring their properties back into use but may not have the means to do so, where they could actually get loans and in return the community bank or the council receive equity or part of the rental income from those properties. Is it not one of the things that we could potentially look at? Because, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, the council's always been revenue poor, but it's never been difficult getting its hands on capital, whether it's borrowing it or whatever. But it is one of those things through the community bank that's kind of dangling the carrot rather than hitting them with the stick and saying, right, okay, we'll help you, we'll provide the loan facility for you to do your home up, but in return we want part of the rental income or equity secured against the loan on the property.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was saying before, but I didn't realise that Matt was talking to the community bank about that. I mean, something along those lines would be, because public money, 2.2% or whatever at the moment, it's much better than private people can access.
I'm more than happy to have a conversation with Matt about it. I think one of the challenges we face is, yes, money is clearly a challenge. I think also we've for a lot of stock, we've probably already picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of energy efficiency, whether that be loft insulation, etc., etc. What we're probably having to deal with now is a lot of older stock where it's not, where you haven't got the energy efficiency, you can't do cavity wall insulation, etc., etc. So the measures themselves are slightly more complicated, and it's always more challenging and more expensive to retrofit, energy efficiency or green energy to older stock. So I think, yes, the government brought forward a requirement that private rented stock had to have an EPC rating of E, which isn't really that high. So what you need to do is absolutely right. We need to find a way to try and encourage landlords, owner-occupiers and general housing providers about treating their properties to support the overall climate change agenda that we've got at the moment. So I'm happy to have a conversation with Matt outside of here to do that.
But not just climate change. I mean, Matt is doing that with the climate change side of things. What I'm trying to say is you've identified, and it's not just things to do with energy efficiencies. There may be, they need new windows, they need new doors, the slates on the roof need fixed. Is it something that the council can look at to providing a kind of a book facility, loan facility at the Northumberland Community Bank, that where we can offer loan facilities to those private sector landlords in return for equity within those properties to bring them up, not just for energy efficiencies, but overall bring them up to a better standard?
I'm more than happy to do that. I mean, historically, we have, as I say, there used to be significant grant funding from central government for the private sector. That was probably early 80s. It was 95% grant for doing that. So there was a huge uptake of that. We have operated a number of sort of general loan schemes since then, which are very much equity based. So it's very much means tested in terms of trying to identify those who are in the position whereby they need home improvements but can't physically afford it. So yes, how to use the property as equity. So we have operated a loan scheme in the past, and there's still some historic loans on the books at the moment, I think, which with 5 lamps. So again, more than happy to pick that up with Matt as an option, just see how we can do that.
And I think when we talk about equity, we're probably talking about security rather than equity, because I don't think community bank would be allowed to take equity. I think that would be, but it would certainly take security. Yeah. 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 Mark.
Thanks, Chair. In the rural wards, where majority of property is privately owned, I'm really pleased that the council is taking the strategy forward, because I think it's going to become very important. Many wards are losing their community feel due to the holiday boom, you know, that's going into holiday homes, and there is large amounts of hamlets that has been abandoned over the years. So I think it's going to be incredibly important that this council is able to advertise the support that the council is able to give the private sector, and what support packages are going to be available, especially when it comes to energy use. As we discussed in the pre-meeting, a lot of rural homes don't have the access to more energy saving methods, and it's more expensive to put into these properties. So I think what Stephen's saying is a great step forward to allow that to happen. And I think that we definitely see the increase in fuel poverty, and in the report it mentions because of house rents is a part of the fuel poverty problem. So I think that the increase in house rent in the rural area, and potentially the higher cost of putting energy saving methods into those houses, may increase fuel poverty, or able to allow those people that's lived there all their lives stay there in their own community.
I mean, we always say about Northumberland, it's unique in many ways, and you know, housing is no different. And obviously one of the challenges we face is that certain parts of Northumberland don't have the same access to main supplies and main services. And I think that's much more of a sort of broader picture about how do we work with utility companies to try and extend networks and mains to give access to more cheaper fuels and things of that nature. Government are definitely, and I was saying outside of the meeting, I still haven't seen confirmation of this. You know, government are still minded to actually bring an end to the installation of domestic gas boilers in 2025. And that's very much about trying to force an agenda of looking at different types of energy and different types of fuel. But again, you've got to have the alternatives to actually make that work and make that viable. So I think, yes, anything we can do, and I will speak to Matt, anything we can do to try and facilitate some of that work, whether it's with owner-occupiers, private rented or otherwise, I think has a benefit, you know, whether it be fuel poverty, whether it be just in general condition of stock, because our stock is getting older. You know, the rate we're building houses vis-a-vis, you know, the age of our stock, we still have a disproportionately old housing stock. And, you know, we're not going to end up replacing that in a very short period of time. So we need to keep investing in that stock. So I think in terms of rural, yes, it does present some additional challenges. Fundamentally, we need to try and protect what we've got out there in the rented sector to start with, because obviously some of our towns and villages, especially coastal and rural, are seeing huge challenges from second homes. You know, some place we've got 50-odd% second home ownership. We've seen a few neighbourhood plans coming forward where they're actually trying to protect properties and actually prevent second homes ownership, etc. So I think there's a whole raft of things we need to do within our rural communities. You know, we talked before about estate regeneration and the need to look at estate regeneration. Some of this work is actually about, you know, protection of our smaller communities. If we lose, you know, if we lose the rented sector and we end up with just second homes, we're losing our communities. And if we haven't got the right housing to offer to those people who work within the rural community, again, we'll see people withdrawing from the rural community. So there's, you know, can't stress it enough, and members will be aware of this. There are some significant challenges for us in terms of dealing with, I think, our current housing stock, working with our landlords, and some of that is, yes, amplified within the rural sector as well, because the challenges are there in terms of fuel, access to utilities as well. But we can speak to Matt and just see what the options are to see if there's a broader scheme or a broader package we can look at for support.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm conscious of the fact that Phil's got a meeting 3 minutes ago. Does anybody have any other very last quick questions? No? Well, thank you very much. I think there's some fairly searching questions there and very comprehensively answered. So thanks for that, Phil, and thanks for the patience of Joanne and Nigel, who've been waiting for. So I think Phil's going to leave now and get on to his other calls. So thank you. Sorry. Oh,
Just
recommendation.
confirm, yes. This obviously is a report that's going to Cabinet on the 7th of September. There's a recommendation, it's a Cabinet recommendation, and the committee are asked to confirm whether or not they support that. Obviously, noting the comments that are made.
I think if I just suggest something and see if everybody agrees. I mean, I think we suggest that we do wholeheartedly support this work, and we acknowledge it's really important work, and we would like to see as much of it happen as fast as possible, and it be given sort of serious priority. Is everybody happy with that? Yeah. Great.
Could I just make a comment? I mean,
Yeah.
Phil, this is nothing but what we've been talking about, so if you need to go, go. No. I think, in general terms, we've got a massive job ahead of us in this county for meeting government targets for things. I mean, Phil mentioned, somebody mentioned, Mark, the removal of gas boilers before, though. The problem we've got is that these wonderful new technologies, ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps, work really well, but they only work in a well-insulated house, because this equipment runs at a lot lower temperature. When you're heating your house with gas or oil, or even solid fuels through boilers, you run your water at a really high temperature. When you're using air source heat pumps, you look at a lot lower temperature. And I can talk about this with because I've got one. I live in a modern house that's fully insulated. I've got dirt cheap bills, and I moved from an old drafty farmhouse where I couldn't afford to run. I've seen the two extremes. But if you look at the county... Sorry?
You're in a nursing home, aren't you, Colin?
So if you look at the county as a whole, the type of housing we've got, both in the public sector, because Phil said we've got an old housing stock now, and you know, we talk about this all the time behind the scenes. It doesn't, the new technologies don't marry up to them houses, and the cost of bringing them up. So in the next, 5, 10, 15 years, whoever's running this authority, whoever is still around, there's some major problems ahead of us to look at these modern, are efficient systems, but certainly not efficient in old housing stock. They're not.
Yeah, no, I think it's a serious problem, and I'm sure Nick would have a view on that as well. But I think one of the things that I mean, obviously, it's going to require commitment by government, I think, ultimately at the end of the day, isn't it, to deliver on the national aspirations, but also the other thing. I mean, I did work for a while in the offshore wind sector, and one of the things that changes the dynamic is the technology improving, and I think what we'll see, because of it's a bit like California saying we're not going to have anything but electric cars. Suddenly all of the big American car companies start developing electric cars, and the technology emerges very rapidly. So we've got to just sort of that pressure has to be put on the sector to deliver that technology to make it happen. Nick?
Thank you. Yeah, I could add just very briefly to what Colin said that the problem seems to be with retrofit and retrofit assessors, because if you identify that your property needs to be better insulated before you get an air source heat pump or the like, you need to retrofit assessor, and you can't get them. It's a major problem. Could I just ask two very quick questions? One is related. There's this table on pages 4 and 5, the implications. Also pages 12 and 13 of the whole document, pages 4 and 5 of the actual housing strategy report. It says carbon reduction, no implications, none. Well, there are carbon implications because we've just been talking about them. Priority 3, improving energy efficiency. So that's just a mistake, isn't it?
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Sean, would you be able to point that out to the report's author, that surely there must be some carbon reduction implication?
I will ask Julie to confirm that before it goes to Cabinet.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And if I could just ask one more very quick question. There's no talk about building homes here and about building affordable homes, but presumably that's because it's covered by another strategy.
It is,
fine.
yeah. There's,
Okay,
but
thank you.
yeah, the sort of yeah.
One They don't have access to the mains grid. And one of the worst offenders for that is the Ministry of Defence. Because although we've tried, because a lot of them are centred around the Otterburn military training area and their farm properties, and the County Council has and is and continues to be willing to do what it can to assist, as does Northern Power Grid. But one of the two main difficulties we've come up against in trying to get those properties on grid into a better standard is the MOD, the Defence Estates, and it is the National Park.
Right, yeah, no, that's acknowledge that point. Great, okay, well, thank you very much. I think that concludes that report, and thank you very much for coming along, Colin. It's good to see you. And now we're going to have another equally important report about our leisure facilities across the county, and I think Nigel, who is the head of service for that department, the sort of longest title in the county, culture, leisure, tourism, and probably quite a lot else. And Joanne, who's from Active Northumberland, is going to give us an update on what's been happening during what's been a pretty sort of tumultuous year, I imagine, within Active. Joanne Ferrier, who's head of commercial and development for commercial resources for Active Northumberland, who has a significant impact into pulling together the performance information. And we should be joined, hopefully virtually, by the Chief Executive of Active Northumberland, Mark Warnes, who unfortunately is self-isolating at the moment, but we are going to, I understand Mark Warnes is going to be able to join us particularly for the questions, but Joe will take us through a presentation which summarises essentially the outcomes from last financial year, which, as you said, Chair, were far from ordinary. So basically, NCC has a 4-year partnership agreement with Active Northumberland to provide management service. Oh, sorry, Chair. NCC has a 4-year partnership agreement with Active Northumberland to manage leisure services across 9 large leisure centres, 7 additional sites and 3 school sites. Earlier this year, Mr Chairman, Scrutiny received an update on the monitoring framework we have in place within that partnership agreement, which went through our requirements as a council in terms of monitoring both corporate KPI submission and qualitative and the more quantitative information. Within the partnership agreement, we do have a requirement for Active Northumberland to present essentially an annual service report or outcomes report, which we're going to receive today. As the Chair absolutely said, it's been far from a typical financial year, which I'm sure Joe's presentation will reflect. The leisure hospitality sector has been particularly hard hit. And I'm sure Joanne will talk about it, but in terms of Active Northumberland, subject to major closure on the 20th of March through to July, then a further closure in November, partial reopening December, then a further full closure January 21, and then a partial resumption in April 21 with individual use. So it's been far from a typical year, and obviously that has had the very physical impact on access and participation, and also consequently that has had an impact on revenue generation potential as well. But if I can just hand over, Chair, now to Joanne, and if, I don't know if we can check if Mark's available. Have we got a technician here? We're going to check if Mark's online.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Nigel.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. That's great. Thank you, Mark. Great. So over to you, Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So yeah, as Nigel said, we're just going to go through a brief little bit of our service report so you guys can get a bit more of a better picture as to what we've gone through as an organisation. And for those that don't know, a bit of a background about Active Northumberland as well. So I'll just dive straight in and then we'll have questions at the end if that's all right. Thank you. So Active Northumberland is a registered charity formed in 2014 as a result of a merger of 4 different leisure providers. The business is overseen by a board of 10 highly experienced volunteers. We also have a circa of 710 employees. That's a mixture of casual and contracted staff. The majority of our facilities are owned by Northumberland County Council and are leased by us. In turn, we manage the operation on the leisure facilities and services on behalf of NCC under a partnership service level agreement. We operate 9 large centres, as Nigel alluded to before, which is also combined with leisure and library services operated by NCC, as well as several small facilities, including our school sports facilities, 2 welfare centres and a Pegasus riding centre. And also, as our name suggests, all of our facilities and service management contracts are within the county of Northumberland. Our vision is to be the best community and wellness provider in the UK. We want to deliver quality leisure. I've got braces in, sorry, that's why I keep talking funny. They're just new. Physical activity and sport and opportunities across Northumberland to improve the health and fitness of the population of Northumberland, in line with obviously NCC's health and wellbeing strategy also. People in Northumberland will have a better quality of life as a result of their participation in physical activity and sport. Activity Northumberland is not just about sport, it is about wellness and feeling fitter, and we are very focused on improving the health and wellbeing to prevent ill health and social isolation. Sorry, the highlights around what we have come through in 2021 and 2020 is a little bit around our large facilities being within the public for 128 days. So we were only open for 128 days within that time due to the restrictions of the national government lockdowns. Most of Active Northumberland workforce was furloughed or part furloughed due to the reduction of the activities and the spaces available within our sites, which we had to be compliant with government and safety guidelines. We adopted our app and our website, and we changed them massively, where we could enhance and create a full digital booking system for all of our activity sessions available to the public. Customers were also able to view a number of available spaces within the sessions, and also all spaces were set up according to the government guidelines and government bodies. All sessions started and ended time was staggered to reduce the amount of people coming in our facilities at one given time, to provide us additional time in between each session to clean as we went. Our health and fitness team came along and support the marketing team, supplied free online digital exercise classes via our social media platforms, and we also did a dedicated service for that as well. Each of the classes have a different level of intensity in order to appeal to different customers across the abilities. New outdoor fitness sessions was designed and rolled out, as well as our outdoor boot camp sessions, in order that we could continue to provide a meaningful service despite the restrictions. During lockdown, 3 of our large facilities, Ashington, Wentworth and Willoughburn, were used for an LST site, test centres, and we were also delighted that 80 of our colleagues were able to become trained in them various roles to help and support the staff across those centres for NCC. Financial highlights. Active Northumberland's budget is a circa of a £12 million income. In 2021 and 2020, year-end position shows a loss of 8.17 million. Active maintains our reserves of a 1.3 million. We have an agreement with the council as part of our SLA agreement, where we have made some efficiency savings over the 3 years, which, as you can see in the report, we have done that also. Over the 3 years, we've had to save 765k, which we are on target to do that, by the way. Utility tariffs increase and continue to represent a significant budget pressure. However, we have achieved a reduction of the utility consumption, mainly due to closures, but we are carefully managing that along with NCC also. We estimate further utilities increases over 2021 and 2022. However, NCC and AN are working closely together to manage them and mitigate those pressures. Financial highlights, again, I'll just run through this, and then if you've got the questions at the end, it's probably more for Mark around the financial side. Income streams, we have fitness, gym and exercise, and as you can see, we have had a significant difference from 2019 to now to 2021. Aquatics, which is our general swim, and Learn to Swim. Learn to Swim is our Learn to Swim scheme. We've got leisure attractions, which is inclusive of bowling and things like that, clip and climb, soft play. Trading, cater and vending, pitch hire and fees. Now, obviously, everything has been closed at that given time. As you can see, we have had a huge reduction in them. What has helped us through 2020 and 21 is the grants, furlough, top-up schemes from NCC, additional financial support and the Leisure Recovery Fund that we were successful in gaining. Participation and performance. So our swim visits did massively decrease. We are now only been delivering 85,000. Learn to Swim programme occupancy rates have dropped by 1%. We are still delivering a high level of that, but because of the restrictions that we have had to really reduce the Learn to Swim programme, which means we've had to take some lessons out and spread them across the board. Gym visits have decreased also. Over 3,300 exercise referral engagements have been delivered over a long-term health condition. So what we did with that is our exercise and referral scheme, our weight management scheme. We made sure that we rang them all, we did Zoom calls with them all, and that's what that engagement is, to make sure that although they were in isolation, we still managed to maintain a relationship with them. Over the course of this time, we've had 5,977 Facebook posts. An average social media reach post was 1,164. Going forward, the performance will be monitored and evaluated, involving NCC with our key performance indicators and our framework. Active Northumberland's quality management system will be aligned to pursue Quest and quality assurance accreditation at our main facilities. A number of the operation outputs and benefits from a national benchmark. And so what that means is there is a national benchmark which we provide into from an Active Northumberland perspective. And that is like mystery visits. They come out and check everything. They check all your policies and procedures. It is just like checking your quality of everything that you deliver and do from start to finish. Ashington has just achieved very good as accreditation for that. So we are very pleased with that. We did just narrowly miss out on the excellence, which is the highest rating that you can achieve. Our future aims in the community. We've got a system a programme that we call Mums on the Move. I hope you have all heard of it. It's running very successfully at the moment and has done during the COVID restrictions also. One thing that we have started to do is something that we call We've Got This Challenge. We've recruited 20 new mums over this to partake in several classes in January, where we've provided prizes and certificates for the mums to engage in that. Indoor and outdoor sessions were held as postnatal ladies, including core stability, buggy walks, total tone and mums with prams. Successful workshops were held with the healthcare professionals in partnership with Antenatal to promote the exercise of postnatal ladies and help signpost to postnatal and prenatal. During lockdown, the programme has adapted accordingly so new mums can stay supported and be active at home and after the baby and pre-baby. We held free weekly programmes online, workouts led by the Mums on the Move instructors, available live and on demand. Our Time For You campaign, led by our wellbeing coaches, took place over a 3-month period and provided focused on Zoom sessions where mums could chat and still feel engaged with other mums. And we've also provided yoga sessions to help relax them. Various fun Facebook competitions were run, including Fun Baby Caption competition. That's hard to say with these braces in. 12 Days of Christmas competition, and also our daily activities and prizes. So it's very well engaged, the Mums on the Move. What we are doing now is we are restarting indoor and outdoor classes, setting up partnership, which includes Little Movers, founders of Mums with Pilates, and also through the NHS, we have a great advocacy with the health visitors and the midwifery, can't get my teeth in today, midwifery. Continuing our antenatal online with Mums to Be and refreshing all of our photography around the Mums with Prams. Now, the Mums with Prams is predominantly ran through Blythe, and it's on the beachfront over there, so it is a nice way for them to engage as well and feel part of that community. Creating video, customer testimonials, support online and marketing efforts, gathering customer feedback through our June and online surveys that we have delivered. So again, we're continuously working with them and asking them to make sure that what we are providing is what they want to see and what they would like to engage in. And then just a few comments what people have engaged with us as part of the testimonials that we've had. So they're saying that it's great to be here and have the baby with them. Nice to talk to us. Everyone is friendly and open. Safe exercise when pregnant and post. We'll share this with you after so you can read them for yourselves, so I don't go through them all. We've also had to change and adapt massively around our group exercise programme and learn to swim aims. Due to COVID restrictions. So the group exercise programme we will be delivering and continuing to an efficient group exercise programme which is innovative and on trend. It is very inclusive to all. It will utilise our Les Mills programmes, our virtual plans, which will be installed fully over 3 centres over the end of the calendar year. We will develop all aspects of our group training, including how we set targets, meet club goals, how we create a timetable that drives maximum attendance, and how to recruit and motivate worldwide class instructors. We will continue to implement our innovative new gym blueprint, our new facilities with Berwick, Morpeth and other partners with Technogym, Escape, Jordan Fitness, MyZone and Octane. The Learn to Swim programme we want to develop further as we continue with this journey, utilising our 4 Swim England Learn to Swim frameworks. Active Northumberland have also worked closely with 5 key areas within Northumberland, which is the Northumberland Swim Clubs, and we're creating a performance programme allowing us to adopt them swimmers that will help us to maintain national level within that service. Swimmers then have the opportunity to join the clubs as such life-saving skills, snorkelling and triathlon clubs. So we want to start from birth all the way right through to a suitable age where they want to see they go into the normal swim or whether they want to continue to do life-saving things and snorkel and triathlon. So it's entirely up to them what they do, but we are catering for all. We've been currently rebranding and remodelling all of our catering outlets. Now, this is one of the areas that has been massively affected due to COVID. Whilst we've been on lockdown, we have taken the opportunity to rebrand, relook, and re-establish what we were about. We created new kiosk focus, encouraging customers to grab a coffee, so it's a bit of a grab and go thing. We've tried to ensure in the particular areas around soft play areas, clip and climb, that it is quick and easy for them to utilise and grab something, a light bite for them. We also do promote good nutrition, the importance of hydration throughout our sites and good commercial offering. This will have a positive impact on our customers' dietary choices, supporting the health and eating agenda. We'll provide the place for residents of Northumberland to congregate in an environment that supports good mental health and ensures the public have a sense of well-being. We are developing a network of talking tables across Hive outlets to encourage interaction for future development and commitment, reducing isolation and loneliness. Our service improvement aims, we want to obviously continue our service to our customers through utilising digital channels and front-end technology. So what we're aiming to do is reduce the queues at reception, expand digital services for stay-at-home users or those that are in the rural areas and can't get into the facilities, expand the use of kiosks and tablets at the front of house, self-serve and check-in kiosks. Company policies will be rewritten and put in easily access place for the staff intranet and for public. Full visibility of KPIs on a monthly basis available to staff, a suite of process documents which we will create a roadmap for creating long-term process improvements. Measure performance through external audits and aim for 3 larger site quests, as we mentioned before. Ashington, Concordia and Wentworth will be on that list. Work with the health walk leaders to develop a walk and volunteer programme. The school programme from 2021 and 22 was cancelled due to COVID-19. However, 2022 and 23 programme will be discussed and developed with the schools in the autumn of 21. Reassess our existing exercise on referral participation and expand the scheme to new referrals. Implement new weight management schemes, which is currently still running and going extremely well, and advertise new service via advertising channels and existing ones where we want to expand on them. And the next part is obviously the capital investment and the remedial work. So there has been a lot of work gone on with this over 2020 and 21. Some essential works were brought forward from the original timescales with the intention to provide a minimal impact to the customers at the time when the sites could possibly reopen. So one thing we have opened is a 3G pitch at Swan Centre Berwick. That opened in February. Work began on the new Morpeth Centre in February 21. Electrical and back office work was completed at Concordia Leisure Centre. Waterworld Prudder and Willoughburn received new and efficient boilers, and solar panels were installed as part of the green energy strategy. As part of our wellbeing strategy, one of the key things that we have developed is the spas within our new facilities. So Ashington, Blythe, Concordia and Ponteland now have all of these facilities, and we aim to ensure the term wellbeing within our facilities and not directed to a person's physical wellbeing, but also to help with their mental wellbeing. We have been developing our spas to make sure that the customers have somewhere to relax and unwind and feel a sense of wellbeing. Our aim is to provide a promotional offer to our customers when government restrictions allow us to. That is actually started now, so we have already just opened them. And that does bring me to the end. Sorry about my braces and my teeth.
Worry. That was, thank you very much. That was very, very comprehensive. I think what that shows us is that Active Northumberland is more than just running leisure centres. It's it's contributing to health and well-being and to physical health and mental health and general wider good to our communities. It's a very, very important organisation, and it's also the other thing that strikes me is that you've used the time wisely during COVID to make improvements to the organisation, and that obviously with all of the investment that's been going into improving leisure centres and facilities across the county, I think we are I think we can be optimistic about quite an exciting future. Stephen was the first hand that I saw raised.
Yes. No, thanks. 18 months you've had, and it really has been a hugely difficult time for you. But I'm going to take this opportunity to bring up my little corner of the world, because my little corner of the world in Rothbury has a and I'm going to be trying to be diplomatic here and give its benefits and downsides, but it effectively is a breeze block, tin roofed swimming pool and gym, where the swimming pool is currently devoid of any water. And it is, I read the back of the report where it does show some fantastic achievements that this council has made in investing in some of our major town centre facilities. But the little facilities like Rothbury, which got a patch and repair job about 15 years ago, have been neglected and really can't go any longer with more patch and repair jobs. It needs a new facility at Rothbury, and I know that isn't directly your responsibility. It is for within the council, so it's a shame the cabinet member isn't here. Yeah, it's one of the, Nick mentioned when we came in that one of his biggest issues at the moment is potholes, which we all know it is, but one of the biggest communication issues I'm getting at the moment from residents is the the gym and pool facility at Rothbury, and the fact that there is limited access available at the moment because of the site, but the fact the swimming pool is empty. And if you want to align it with our, which Glenn likes to talk about, our energy efficiencies and green agenda going forward, I don't think the round trips to Alnwick for my residents, or the school bus loads full of children that are having to be transported on a weekly basis to Alnwick, are in line with any green agenda that the council may wish to advance. And I know, and I had a conversation with Mark last week as well, and I know it's not something that Active can directly address. We need to look at it as a council, but I'll make it clear, I'm not averse to pulling a Councillor Hill stunt and amending the budget in February if something's not in.
Thank you. No, thank you. You've made that very, very plain indeed. And I mean, I think the point I'd make, obviously, it is an administration issue, not an active issue, and I'm sure you'll be raising that directly with the portfolio holder and maybe even the leader. So I think, I'm looking forward to the day when we get Corbridge Leisure Centre. But so you're very lucky. You have something at least. But Nigel, is there anything you want to say in response to that?
Thank you, Chair, and I think probably Councillor Bridget's probably aware. I did check this with Maureen Taylor. I believe Strategic Estates.
I chased them yesterday. I'm still waiting.
Okay, they've been engaged to look at the existing site, to look at what opportunities are there. Okay, so I assure you I will continue to pursue that on your behalf. In terms of rurality, 2,000 square mile county, it's recognised in our indoor sports facility strategy. Access in those communities is an issue, and it is important, and we do have unique access barriers. We're obviously aware of that, and we will do the best we can.
Thank you.
That's great. I mean, it is challenging, the pure size of the county. Mark.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for your report. I would say well done to Active Northumberland for getting through this period. It was just said in the pre-meeting before about the number of centres not opening again after COVID. So I think you need to congratulate yourselves on being forward-thinking and getting reopened. I'd just like to echo what Stephen's saying about the rural. Now, I know you mentioned it in your report there about you taking rural seriously, but I think going forward with long COVID and people trying to get back to fitness after COVID, the sheer trip to the nearest sports centre from rural wards is going to absolutely exhaust them, what I believe from people I know with long COVID. So I think we need to seriously look at how do we interact better, whether it's a mobile scheme of getting people out into the community from Active, or how we get them into the centres. I think it's going to be really important. And also being, I'd like to mention, as a right leg amputee, we feel as a group of amputees there's not actually a lot of service out there that can help us. And I think that it's quite a big confidence step for somebody with an amputee to go to a standard gym, because not everything works. And I think it would be really good to look at more specialism, trained staff that could help with disability, that could help with long COVID going forward, because I think they're going to be two major points. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne.
As we did discuss earlier as well, Mark, I totally agree with you in terms of the less abled people, and we do need to help, and I think that's where we need to work more collaboratively with the councillors, and you guys need to help us and focus in them particular areas to understand the sheer volume of people that we are talking around as well, and again to get the experts in and to advise us, because we aren't experts in that field, as you rightly say, but we absolutely do want to help to do that, and especially within our new buildings we have been adapting to that and understanding it a little bit further, but it is something that we want to establish a little bit further, so I'm happy to work together and how we can get moving with that, absolutely.
I think it's worth also saying about the accessibility thing is that I know Joe mentioned earlier in the presentation is that obviously that's one of the reasons why we pursued the digital offering, and certainly during the lockdown periods we were offering our digital service free of charge, and I know that's not necessarily ideal for everybody, but certainly it was one way that we could try and reach and penetrate the communities while we were closed, and obviously for those people who do have difficulty in actually accessing some of the sites. So that's something that we're continuing to develop, and we've got quite a library of not only recorded material but also live material as well. So that's something we continue to develop.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, my wife used the digital services during lockdown very, very successfully. Eileen was next, and then Malcolm.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Chair, I'll have to go shortly because I got pinged for a meeting earlier. Right, I've got long COVID and I've had COVID twice, so I don't think I'll get pinged again. Anyway, right, I'm going to go to my corner of the world, Stephen, right, which is urban deprivation. The wards I work in is the most deprived ward in Blythe in the whole of Northumberland, right? Now, years ago, when I first started working in the community as a community worker, we had sports development coaches that would go into community centres and help run groups, and they were very, very successful. Reason being, children can only access activities if their mum gives them money to access facilities and sports centres and such like. A lot of the children I work with, they don't get this kind of money because their mum doesn't have it. If their mum doesn't have it, babies not want to give it, right? Or cannot give it because they need it for food, shoes. The other side of that spectrum is the elderly population that I work with, and a lot of them do not feel comfortable going into sports centres and gyms. Now, years ago, I lived in the sports centre practically, but now I don't feel comfortable going in it, so I can empathise with how people feel, right? However, years have gone by and the sports development teams have dwindled, and they don't reach out as much into these grassroots community centres anymore. Now, at one time, I would have 7 dance classes in, very, very well attended. I can't even get hardly a dance tutor now because she's just left, right? But I do think what you do with the mums and everything on the seafront is great. What you're doing with the digital thing's great. However, a lot of the elderly population in the ward that I work in don't have internet or don't have a computer, right? But I do think if you actually really wanted to reach back out into those grassroots communities and include these people that really need the help, especially with COVID, because they don't want to go into these places like sports centres, they may well, they're even struggling to come back into community centres, never mind a big sports centre. I do think something could be looked at to actually start working again right in the communities with the community development workers that are already working in there, who run the community centres, and do something. And to be fair, it doesn't cost that much money to run something in a community centre as opposed to how much it costs to run a big sports centre, you know, for the odd few sessions that used to be. And honestly, they were really well attended, and I think all that's just kind of going and practically gone from the centre I run anyway, which I worked very, very strongly in a long time with the sports team, and it's kind of gone. And I do think there's room for improvement there at grassroots level, and I'm sure in Stephen's community, in places like that where you've got community centres, that would be a benefit as well. I never thought about the rural side of it, Stephen, but I would imagine there's community centres in your place that would, you could actually hit that community if you utilised what was in their community already. You know, I mean, I know you've built new and you've improved your facilities and everything, and it's great, but not for everybody.
I mean, I would say that we do obviously pre-COVID we did work sort of hand in glove with NCC sports development team. Obviously, a lot of the services that were provided by those teams in conjunction with our school sports team had obviously had to drop off while COVID has actually taken place. So I mean, I don't know, Nigel, if you wanted to say anything about the sports development team from NCC and what's happening there currently in terms of any sort of resurrection on that, but certainly, you know, we would welcome any efforts to bring people back into centres, certainly from the elderly communities and things like that. So we would certainly be wanting that to resurrect.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. Possibly to preempt a further question. We're currently in a 4-year partnership agreement with Active Northumberland. We've seen some of the great work going on. As with any council, major council investment, we do need to review that investment to ensure performance, assess value for money against the current partnership. But are the priorities now the same as they were 4 years ago as a council? So we're starting to pull together in terms of reference to work with Active on a review of the current arrangements. And absolutely, the members are absolutely right. We're in a very different landscape now. There's the long COVID. There's also people's perception towards people's sentiment to going into working out in larger groups. There's the online digital presence. We know people's have been exposed, saturated with the digital aspect so much. Is that going to have an impact on future income levels, and how do we adapt to that? The whole aspect around public health improvement, which has got the major capital investment, and in the context of community together, I think it's a balance going forward. The balance, again, just working my way through this. You've got the customers who can access these centres, you know, and have that great experience. But we need to look about how we can collaborate more. Again, integrated health team, public health, sport development, to actually say how can we work the hardest with those who need it most. I think that's the way to do it. It's not an easy one, you know, in terms of it's quite a changing landscape, but that's something we're determined to do. Eileen, on that one, Councillor Carty on that. I do understand the requirement for that, and it's something that it is essentially working hardest for those who need it most. Yeah. You've got people who can access, who don't face barriers or have more choices than certain people in communities, but then there is individuals and communities that do need interventions and need that support. And obviously it does present its challenges in terms of resources, but I think we've got an opportunity now with the learning through COVID, and sports development are working closer than ever with communities together, and the work they did around the pop-up activities in the holidays. I know that sports development are entering into partnerships with certain town councils as well. So it's a challenging time, but looking to the future, it is the time to really open this up and see how we can maximise the benefits of that investment.
That's great, thank you. I mean, I would just make a point before coming to Malcolm's question that it's in the report, but catching people early and getting into schools in terms of the overall impact on health right across the county is absolutely essential, and you know, that work that you're doing in schools through sports development and through Active is critical, because you can get people into the mindset that exercise is a good thing at an early age. That will stay with them for life, and initiatives like the Daily Mile, school sports games, things that, you know, all of those things are absolutely critical, and the more we see of that, the better. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. And just to preface my question, because I'm not going to let the opportunity slip neither. You know, we've got 18,500 people looking enviously at Councillor Bridget's tin hut. I mean, it's that ridiculous in Bedlington. So certainly I'll be expecting to see Bedlington mentioned in any review of strategic provision across the county. But my question to Active is about the policy you had on refunds when you closed, because I know there was a lot of concern. People got in touch with me about it. They weren't being offered the money back. They couldn't access the centres. It seems to have changed recently. So I would just like to ask what your policy was on refunds and whether it's changed recently.
Thank you.
Joe, do you want to just come in on that, on the refund piece?
Yeah. So pre-COVID and still currently, our policy is non-transferable and non-refundable. However, with that being said, what we do is we look at the case by case individually. During COVID, when we did have to close suddenly, what we did do is we did refund everybody back, because obviously that is a situation that is out of our hands, out of everybody's hands, and nobody should be penalised for that. We did work through that. There were absolutely thousands of transactions to do, which we did tirelessly work through, and it did take us a long time to get through them, as all of our staff were furloughed with only a handful not. How it currently stands is still the same. Non-transferable, non-refundable. However, if people are isolating and things like that, what we are doing is we are topping up our cashless accounts. Now, what that means to a customer is on their online account, the money is put back onto their account, so then they can purchase something again. So the money they are not losing, or we transfer it. But as our bookings are only 2 weeks in advance, so we can only move up to that time unless they are isolated. And like I said, we've been putting the money back into their online account. So physically back on their debit card, they're not getting the refund, but they're getting the money back to repurchase again. So they aren't losing out.
So they're basically getting a credit note.
Essentially.
My second question, you mentioned it, quite a significant financial loss. Can you tell me where the bulk of that was built up?
Mark will probably help there.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the loss, it was purely down to the catastrophic loss in revenue. I mean, obviously, we've made up quite a substantial amount of the loss in terms of where we've seen things such as business grants, obviously the National Leisure Recovery Fund, which we were successful in applying for and got the maximum amount for that, which has obviously gone into not only last year's accounts, but will obviously be filtering through into this year's accounts as well. But obviously our biggest expenditure, as you can imagine, running these centres is obviously staff and utility costs. And of course, the utility costs continue whether you're open or not. The one thing that we alluded to in the presentation there is that obviously we have been very careful about how we have operated the centres in terms of things like, you know, lighting, pool temperatures, pumps, all of the plant machinery and things. We've obviously tuned all of that down during the closed period to try and obviously reduce the costs on our utilities. But, you know, certainly with a lot of these big buildings, and when you've got big pools especially, you still have to turn over the pumps, you still have the filtration, you still have to dose the water. And obviously from our perspective is that given the uncertainty throughout the whole of the closure period, you never actually really knew how long it was going to be before you were reopening again. So obviously what we couldn't do is just sort of drain all of the pools and have no water in there and not heat the water. So and obviously there are also implications to doing that, which is obviously that when you do have large pools and you suddenly drain them down thinking that you're going to try and save money on utilities, actually what then happens is the pressure changes on the pools and you then have problems with the liners and tiles and things like that. So when you think you're trying to make some savings, you can actually be building in extra cost as well. So we've taken a very pragmatic view across all of our costs throughout those closed periods to try and obviously reduce the losses.
Thank you, Mark. Can I just ask a couple of questions, and then we'll come to Brian. Is that okay? So just really relating on from that, COVID is not over, but it's kind of ending. Restrictions are being relaxed. Could you just give us a little bit of a feel for what's actually going to mean on the ground for users of the centres? I made the comment next door that I've not been able to play five-a-side in the Wentworth for a year and a half, and I'm looking forward to that starting again. And then if we could also just, there's a mention in the document of the transformation strategy, which I'm guessing is kind of the longer term plans for the development of the organisation. So if you could give us an idea of you know what that means and how the new facilities are going to contribute to that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the moment in terms of our operation, I mean, virtually everything is now back open and running. Some of the centres or some of the smaller centres aren't necessarily open for full time, and that's mainly because of the fact that we've seen obviously quite a dramatic reduction in certainly over the period we saw quite a dramatic reduction in membership numbers in particular, and especially proportionally around some of those smaller centres. But now literally every activity is back. Most of our clubs and associations and things are now back and working with us. Certainly with regards to all of our outdoor activity, most of that has been back from since March actually. So across the board, you know, we're seeing all of our activities back. back. The one thing for sure is that in terms of our membership, obviously, as you can appreciate, we lost a huge number of members over the period. We had quite a lot of members that were on freeze and had frozen their membership, which was a strategy that we adopted. Rather than cancelling memberships down, we just decided to put everyone on freeze and then obviously allowed them to come back when they were ready. In terms of the sort of new facilities and things, obviously we've seen Ponteland open last October, although it only opened for a couple of days before it reclosed. But certainly we've now got some fantastic new facilities in the community there, new clip and climb walls, new spa, new soft play, and we're actually seeing, you know, really good numbers coming back. And if we look at our, for example, our swimming lessons and things and clubs, they're all back, and they're all back in good numbers. So our mission really over the next few months is to re-engage with a lot of those members who had actually left us, and we're doing that in various different ways, both through marketing and also through telephone engagement and email campaigns to try and attract people back. But certainly, you know, we're very much focusing now on different types of membership, which we're pleased to say that this year we introduced the sort of junior membership, which we've seen a huge response from, and also we've put out different initiatives as well, including a new NCC offer for staff offer, which we've obviously seen a great uptake as well. So across the board, there's lots happening. There's lots of things that we've been doing during the closed period to sort of transform the business as part of the transformation strategy, but also as part of some of the things that COVID have now forced us to really look at the operation of our business and how we can work much more effectively and efficiently across the piece.
Thank you. Joanne, is there anything you want to add to that?
I would just add on the transformational strategy. So as part of the work that we do with NCC and Nigel's team is we do track and monitor that. So we have an outcomes framework, and obviously all of our KPIs lead into that. And we identify our outcomes and our objectives, and we do report on them on a quarterly basis to Nigel as well. So that's part of that strategy.
That's great, thanks. Brian, I've been to Ashington Leisure Centre, and it is an incredible facility, the envy of the county, so over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm pleased Jeff Reid isn't here because he keeps claiming responsibility for that. Being one of the last ones to speak, probably most of these questions or concerns have been answered. But firstly, thank you very much for your report. I'm mindful that the report is between 20 and 21. And a lot of the conversations that we've all kind of had that searching answers or questions to what's happening next. So the main thing for active is, and it was highlighted through COVID-19, is, you know, the unfit and overweight people were, dare I say, at a higher risk than normal people. And, you know, your role in the community is paramount. So that being said, the other thing that I really wanted to ask was the cost of the membership and the numbers of the membership from probably at the outset of this report to where we are now, with possibly forecasted numbers of memberships around Northumberland. And I think it was kind of touched on as well about discounts. And just coming back to Malcolm's point about, you know, you said in your open phrase that you're a charity. And, you know, I want to thank you very much, because there's a lot of charities that aren't paying back, because under that title of charity, they don't have to. It's just a payment to keep the organisation running. So thank you for that bit anyway of sorting that out. Nigel touched on it as well. You know, as we come out of COVID, and we've nailed this, we're never going to go back to it. Has your priorities and your business plans changed as well? Because they can't be the same old as what they were before. We have to, and I think Councillor Carty mentioned it. You know, we have to look at it in a different way, try and get into the communities. Stephen's highlighted, and you know, the rural areas. We have to start thinking and prioritising everybody instead of like the sports centres ourselves, and thinking out the box. And the other thing is, because it's all fresh and it's a new conversation, and we're looking at the future rather than looking past tense, is that I know this is an annual report, and I'm going to ask the chair that we have a 6-monthly report on this, not so much a report, but an update given to this committee of how we've come out of COVID, how we've met with the challenges, and how we've changed, dare I say, priorities and business plans to be a successful unit for Northumberland. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. I'll deal with the second point first, if that's okay, because I'd made a note to ask, because you've mentioned the review, Nigel, that's happening, and that's I'm assuming that's going to be in place and signed by the 31st of March. So therefore, I wonder whether maybe in January or early February we could have some input as a committee into where that review is at, and that would probably also serve to have a bit of an update from Active on the sort of the climb out of COVID at the same time. So I think we could roll the two things in together, do something around then, and then we're inputting into the kind of future model as well. So if that's okay, Sean, if you can sort of make noted, and we'll try and organise that. Thank you, Brian. And then, Joanne, do you want to answer the first question? Thank you.
So just in terms of changing our priorities and objectives, obviously we did have to really change them and understand what the community did want and how everyone has changed. Let's face it, everyone has had to change and adapt. One of the biggest challenges I would say that we had was around staffing and making sure that they felt safe and everything. That was our key priority, which we did obviously maintain that and make sure that they were safe before we got any of the community in. The other side of things that we did change was obviously the digital side of things. Now, we initially were looking at that from a different perspective. Again, reducing queues has always been one of our things, and purchasing online, that kind of thing. But the other side was getting people to do it in their own home. We pushed that side of things. That came a lot sooner than we anticipated originally. And again, we worked a lot closely with the exercise on referral and the weight management schemes around that and the elderly to make sure that they could still maintain that. And one of the things that we found by doing that is we were getting them as part of a cohort. I know somebody mentioned before around they might not have internet or they might not have access. So what we did do is we did kind of speak to them on the phone. And we did talk them through some exercise as well. Yes, it was very time consuming, but we were concerned that at times that was probably the only conversation that these people might actually have. So we did invest a lot of our time into that, and again, that wasn't part of our initial strategy to do that because we wanted to do everything as part of a group. So we did identify and really home in on them less vulnerable or more vulnerable. Wednesday. And really strategise that. And one thing that we did get from that is that the customers did come back and say to us how they find it a lot easier talking to us, and they would express things more because it was more of a one-to-one programme as opposed to doing it in a group. So we did feel like the customer got more from that. Whether that is sustainable or not is obviously up for debate of how we can move forward with that, and getting people into smaller groups is what the customers have also come back with, just purely around the exercise and referral and the weight management. They did feel like it worked better separately or individually, or a smaller group as opposed to a large group, and virtually works a lot better for them. So there has been adaptations that we've needed. Thank you very much.
I think that alarm was telling me that I've chaired this meeting really badly and it's gone on for 2 hours already. So, but does anybody have any further questions? Nick.
I've just got a very quick and fairly minor point to make, but the table which forms the bulk of the annual outcome report starts on page 36, and it comes under the heading performance. It doesn't actually tell us much about performance. The left-hand column is all about desired outcomes, and the right-hand column is all about the action plan going forward. It doesn't really comment on performance itself. And I don't think this report is going to Cabinet, but if it is shared more widely, I think it perhaps could have a column added in the middle and comment more on performance.
Yeah, which would kind of you're joining the gap between the past and the future, really, aren't you? Yeah. There, and I think that's a very valid point.
that point in there is what I alluded to before. So that is our strategy, and what we are trying to do is show what we've delivered within the strategy. So again, it's the objectives and the outcomes. So you may not necessarily see exact performance figures like we've grown by this amount or we've had to reduce by this amount, but it does allude to what we have achieved and what we tried to do. But we can absolutely put that in the report. That's absolutely fine.
Thanks.
That's great. So I think if that's all the questions, what we probably need to do is just agree what recommendations we're making. And again, I'm sure, you know, speaking for everybody, I think, but I would personally say that we thank Active for the work that they've done during the pandemic, which has been incredibly valuable for getting things open as quickly as possible, and we're sort of encouraged by the optimism for the future, but noting the challenges ahead that you know Sean will have taken notes of during the meeting. A new health, you know, a new roof for Stephen and a new leisure centre.
A new leisure centre for Rothbury and Bedlington. That's, we're settling for nothing less.
So, but I think so I think generally, but also the point around coming back early in the new year, and so that we can have some input into the development of the next agreement, which is presumably going to be for at least 3 years, is it? Yeah. So that's good. Malcolm.
Can I just make a suggestion that we also recognise the non-core, more social work that's been done by the Active, because I think that's an important part during this pandemic.
Absolutely, it is essential. The work in the communities, the work with schools, the work with the health services and referrals and so on is absolutely essential. Yeah.
And I might point out the elections as well.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
So can I just add one thing, Chair? Obviously, this is the first time I've met quite a lot of views, but just one thing I would like to, as maybe something that you could come forward to us to do, is if you do see anything or identify anything within your particular wards and you do want to have them conversations, I would welcome them sooner rather than later, instead of waiting until we have a meeting. If you've identified something sooner, I would definitely want to have the conversations. If there's anything that we can help change and adapt, then I think it's a good time for us to have them, especially now is the right time for us to change. So if there is anything at all, then please come forward sooner.
Thank you. We appreciate that offer. Brian.
I actually do appreciate that offer, and maybe as a little bit of a thought, throughout Northumberland we've got parish and town councils that you link up with those as well.
Yes.
And you know, you'll get feedback county-wide rather than wait on Northumberland County Council members.
And again, I think it's easier to work together as opposed to you having your separate agendas, us having ours, council having theirs. I think it does need to work more collaboratively together and support and help one another, because we're all trying to achieve the same thing within the community. But what we don't want to do is be on the back foot of that all of the time.
And congratulations on the life your team saved at Willoughburn.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much to all three of you. It's been really, really informative. I'm sorry this meeting has lasted 2 hours, but I think we've had two excellent reports and very, very key things in the sort of county's fabric, really. So I think with that, I don't think there's any urgent business.
Just the work programme.
Oh yes, the work programme, which does anybody have any comments on?
I've got some updates. I mean, there was a bit of a discussion at the last meeting about various aspects of the remit of the committee and how could items could come forward. We did talk about climate change and the fact that it had previously been dealt with by corporate services. We'd be pleased to hear that I've managed to wrestle that away from David, and it will come to this committee. Talking about Mark Baker, Mark has agreed to come to the committee on the 6th of October to give you an update on the Climate Change Action Plan and how progress has been made with that. And I did make a note of the time when his name was mentioned earlier, and I will refer him to the recording of this meeting and sort of catch up on that discussion as well, and see if there's anything that can emerge from that. Also, the North East Public Transport Strategy, again, we discussed that at the last meeting, and again, I said it was a corporate services issue. We did raise it at Chairman's Group, so I think this committee wanted to look at it. And again, I can confirm that Chairman's Group did agree that it can come to this committee. So I'm in discussion with the service head on that issue, just to bring in an update. And again, we hope to be able to do that on the 6th of October. I've also received a query from Nick about active travel and school safety. I'm in discussions with the service head on that as well. And again, I hope to be able to bring something to the committee in about October time. So with that, Chair, I think, and again, obviously, I've made the note about being active in January and February. But if members have any other issues they want to bring forward, if they can let me know. I should just say that what we try and do with the work programme is have a fairly full work programme in the sort of next sort of 3 to 4 months, because that's the sort of lead-in time it takes for reports to sort of come through unless there's a particularly urgent issue. So you will always see that the work programme is pretty full for forthcoming meetings, but then blank, and that is because things merge all the time, priorities change throughout the year. So if there are any issues that members want to raise, if they can either let myself, the Chair, the Vice Chair, or raise them in meetings.
Thank you, Sean. That's really good that you picked up on those points. Stephen.
Just quickly, I'd like you to wrestle away broadband and telecoms from corporate services over to community services, because technically it is a community service, and it yeah, I mean, we are delivering as a local authority. So, Chairman's Group, next meeting, Nick, there's a task for you.
We'll have, maybe challenge David to another duel in the car park over that.
It's not just a case of wrestling from Dave, though. It's what do you want us to do with it once we do get it?
Oh, well, I'm happy to give you a list.
Yeah.
Don't get him started.
No, but I mean, obviously, if there are issues that...
Well, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example, just quickly, because we need to finish. For instance, the North of Tyne Combined Authority has just announced a new fund specifically for the development of 5G technologies in rural Northumberland. And that, I think, is something that would be better off coming to this committee, the Community Services Committee, than it would corporate services. I mean, it is going through North of Tyne, but I'd like us to keep an eye on it, because the implications for communications within the rural communities of Northumberland, I think, is given that you've got 2 of the largest ward members in rural, well, 3 actually, including Nick, in rural Northumberland, I think is a good place to bring it to and help us keep an eye on it in terms of how that's going to be rolled out, and maybe get some of the guys from North of Tyne to come and give us a presentation on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. One of the things that we did also talk about in the last meeting is the hierarchy of issues coming through the system. And very often, when you're talking about sort of rural and local issues, they tend to go to the local area council and then go through to scrutiny, identify what the issues are locally, and then if it transpires that it's actually something that...
Our local area meetings are longer than this one.
All right.
Already.
I'm making the point. It's up to the business chair where particular issues go. That's all I'm saying.
And that's no fault of Colin's, by the way. That's just the amount of time we talk at planning.
Yeah, no, I think that broadband is a county-wide issue, and I'm only too aware of that in the past 4 years. But we'll pick that up at the next meeting of the chairs of the chairs group.
Thank you.
That is important, I think. The other thing I would quite like to do is invite Northumbria Police at some point, maybe the PCC and the Chief Constable or something like that, to come along and talk to us about community policing. So I don't know if everybody thinks that's a good idea, because it is important. They do presentations to local area councils, but it would be good to be talking to the people right at the top and that are setting the strategy and the priorities.
We can invite them, certainly.
Yeah.
Don't know what's good.
Mark first, and then Brian.
Yeah, Chair. I think it would be good to look into Northumberland Fire and Rescue, ask them to produce us a report in retained availability and how much availability we are missing currently in the retained side of the service, and also maybe how a report from the recent audit to give us an update from that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Brian.
Just coming back to your invite there about the police, would that not be something that we could arrange to be a presentation of the full council? Because I think it involves all elected members county-wide, but it's just a thought. And same again with, I'm looking at the list of work that we've got. And under the terms of reference, I would like to try and bring some work together for the highways maintenance. And I'd also like to bring in a summer update of the local neighbourhood services as well. So that would give enough time for the summer to finish and a report to be given on the update.
I mean, the only, slight concern about because having sat through lots and lots of local area councils in the updates from neighbourhood services and highways, is that it tends to always gravitate towards very local issues, and I wonder whether the local area councils might be a better forum for that particular one. Can I discuss it with the other chairs and with the business chair at the next chairs meeting? And
Same again, it's a roundabout performance, you know, how they've come out, but also the idea of how they've linked up with the parish and town councils, because some of them are putting precepts money to enhance services. You know, I think it's just good business that we have a review of that programme. And the reality is we've had one town or parish council have left that enhanced programme, so we don't want any more to leave, so we have to keep a tight hold on that.
Okay. Well, I'll pick it up with you separately, and then I'll take it to the chairs meeting.
That's fine, thank
you. Great. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I think that brings the meeting to a close. So thank you to everybody for their input.